Welcome to Star Wars Comics in Canon. The Force is strong with this one.
Hello there and welcome to Star Wars Comics in Canon, your guide to the wider Star Wars canon through the comic book lens. And to take you on this journey, I'm your host, Mike Burton. And so brings episode 69, which is the funny number. Anyway guys, thank you, welcome, hello, other random greetings. It is good to be here on the finale of the 2015 Star Wars run. Now, I've been doing this since episode 9 of Star Wars Comics in Canon, so right at the very start, and obviously we're now on episode 69, so it's been 60 episodes since I embarked on this. Oh, that's a lot of S's. And this is going to be tackling issues 73, 74, and 75 of the main Star Wars run, and also it's going to be tackling the story An Echo of Victory, which is found in the Empire Ascendant #1 comic, which I'll go into those details shortly. But for any new listeners at all, make sure you go back and check out all the other episodes of the main run of Star Wars on this very show that I have done. And just for a bit of fun, because there's so many of them, I'm going to literally read them out because it makes me a little bit happy. That's the reason I'm doing it. So the previous episodes I have done for Star Wars Comics in Canon, specifically about the 2015 Star Wars run, are episodes 9, 13, 19, 21, 27, 36, 40, 44, 48, 53, 57, 61, 65, and obviously this one, 69. Now, in 4 weeks' time, I will be then embarking on the first volume of the 2020 Star Wars run, but I'll get into all that sort of information right at the end of the episode with what's coming up. And if you haven't tuned in before, I'm going to be giving the footnote story information, so you get a general gist of the plot, and then I'm also going to be connecting it to other Star Wars content as well. And I've got a few interesting ones here, which I'm quite excited to talk about too. So with that in mind, let's get into the details of these comics. So issue 73 of Star Wars was released in October 2019, issue 75 was released in November 2019, the Empire Ascendant 1 comic was released in December 2019, and the trade paperback collection, which includes the 3 Star Wars comics and Empire Ascendant, was released in March 2020. The main Star Wars run was written by Greg Pak, and the artist is Phil Noto, and Phil did an incredible job because he is the penciler / inker as well as the colour artist, and he did a whole bunch of the covers as well, which is incredible, and the artwork in these issues is amazing. So kudos to you, Phil Noto. I have a feeling it's probably Noto, but I do apologise for my mispronunciation. For Empire Ascendant, the story An Echo of Victory was written by Charles Soule, the artist was Luke Ross, and the colour artist was Guru EFX. And all of these stories take place around 3 years after the Battle of Yavin. They are set just before Empire Strikes Back. The banner for issues 74 and 75 say on the top Destination Hoth, so this story is just a big build-up onto how the Rebels basically got to Hoth, in essence, and then it paves way for Empire Strikes Back to start, which is a lot of fun. Now, I want to clarify that I think the Rebels were on Hoth for several weeks, if not several months, before the events of Empire Strikes Back. From what I can tell, I don't think it's been more than like 2 or 3 months from other content as well, because the Dr. Aphra comics that I finished recently, that goes into the details on Hoth a little bit more, and the whole Empire Ascendant collection does a little bit as well. So, I think they've been there at least for a few weeks, maybe a couple of months, before the Empire do show up. But with all that out of the way, guys, let's get into issue number 73. So here is The Crawl. The Rebel Alliance's greatest heroes have embarked on 3 daring missions to thwart the evil Galactic Empire. On K-43, C-3PO and Chewbacca have encountered an unexpected sentient life, and Darth Vader, thwarting their plan of destabilizing the planet's core to sabotage Imperial warships. On Sergia, Luke's efforts to hide a secret rebel camp have been complicated after the thief Warba Kalip stole his lightsaber. And on Lands Carpo, Leia and Han's mission to trick the Empire and the crime lord Boss Carpo into fighting each other was complicated by the interference of Leia's ex, Dar Champion. Dar's now on their side, but Han's been captured by Carpo's thugs. It's quite funny that of the crawl, it's got 3 mini crawls basically within it, and one of them says the word unexpected, and the other 2 say the words complicated, which in a nutshell is exactly how the Rebels seem to live in the show and in the movies as well. So that just made me laugh a little bit. So let's get into the story elements of issue number 73. So issue 73 starts with Han being taken to the Boss Carpo on Lance Carpo. And Boss Carpo is actually a Bith, which is a species that may not sound familiar, but you guys have 100% seen them. And there's one little thing I can do to prove to you you guys know what a Bith is, and that's it's obviously the Cantina Band. Now, the Cantina Band, they are Bith. For a little bit of fun facts about them, the Cantina Band themselves are called Figrin D'An and the Modal Nodes. And that song that I just did a terrible rendition of is actually called Mad About Me, and it is one of Figrin D'An and the Modal Nodes' greatest hits, and it's one of the most popular songs. And if that doesn't jog your memory enough and you're a massive Legends fan, well, Darth Plagueis, so Palpatine's master, who was called Darth Plagueis, who was a Mun, his master, Darth Tenebrous, was also a Bith. So you guys would have seen Bith. They're in the rest of the universe and stuff as well, but that is the species that Boss Carpo is. So still on Lance Carpo, Leia and Dar Champion receive communications from Boss. I'm just going to call him Boss from now on. Now, Boss notes that Han must be involved with Dar. He then threatens to kill Han. Leia interjects and tells him their original plan, which was to send fake rebel messages from the Boss's communication system to obviously frame him in the eyes of the Empire. Boss then confirms that the Imperials were actually conspiring against him, and so he wants them, in exchange for Han's life, to go and kill the Imperial Governor, who is based on a Star Destroyer. Now, to clarify, Leia and Dar actually were the ones who did this whole Imperial conspiracy. When Han was taken away by Boss in issue 72, Leia and Dar were off sorting out their own plan, which is sending a message that looked like it was from Imperials that could then get intercepted by Boss to then get him to be against the Imperials, and then they were hoping that Boss would go off, fight the Imperials, and they would kind of sort themselves out and destroy each other. Obviously, things got a bit complicated, so now they've had to accept Boss's offer to save Han's life so they can go and fight the Imperials. Now, Han is returned to Leia and Dar, so they must now go off and figure out how to take down a Star Destroyer when they're in a small ship. Han plans to bait the Star Destroyer to go where Chewie and C-3PO are, so they can then blow up the planet and hit all of them, which was the original plan when Chewie and C-3PO went to K43 or K43. The plan was to go there, destabilize the core, it would cause an explosion and destroy any nearby Imperial ships, and they were going to, bait lots of Imperial ships there to cause a lot of damage. Now, they got there, and there's some sentient life on there, that these rock people that only 3PO seems to be able to communicate with. And so Chewie and 3PO were in this moral dilemma of whether or not to blow up the planet. There were bombs planted with detonators, and then the detonation countdown was stopped, and, it's going backwards and forwards of whether or not they want to destroy the planet. But in the midst of that, Darth Vader appears, which throws a wrench into the whole plan. So on K43, Chewie is running away from Imperials, and Vader is trying to use the Force to control these rock people. He fails, 3PO thinks that he succeeded, so says success, and then the rock people try and attack Vader. Vader manages to avoid this slightly, and in the commotion, Chewie manages to grab 3PO and basically tries to run away. It's confirmed that half of the detonators are actually set, and the other half have been turned off. So they then communicate with Luke to try and get some moral advice on what to do next. It shows on Sergia that Luke is unsure on what to do. He hears some Imperials approach, and then the communications then cut out, and then it's on to Luke's little story. Luke asks Warba for the lightsaber that she stole, and in response, she then flees on a shuttle. It's shown that the local rebels need some help because there's an Imperial transport about to land and take them on. So what Luke does is he steals a speeder, flies it sort of high in the air, does like a backflip off it, pulling the handlebars up and then kicking it, and the speeder crashes into the Imperial ship, which destroys it and crashes to the ground. The remaining Imperials then continue pursuit of Luke. Warba then appears and gives him his lightsaber back, and that is where comic number 73 ends. Now, I do want to clarify these 3 issues specifically are very dialogue heavy. I'm not reading out the dialogue. Most of it is just stuff about characters like Han and Leia. Almost all of their communication in the last 15, 20 issues of the main run of Star Wars comics, they've almost all been flirting or bickering, that kind of thing where they're clearly into each other and they're the only ones who seemingly don't know that they are. that's basically what their whole thing is. And there's a lot of sort of funny things with 3PO saying, a bit of sort of bouncing back between Chewie and whatnot. But as I always say in this thing, guys, I encourage anyone to go and check these out yourselves. They're on Marvel Unlimited. I think some are on Hoopla. You can buy them yourself on Comixology or physical copies, or you can just be happy with me giving you guys the footnotes version of the plot and the many connections. But they're a good read, these Star Wars comics, but I'll give my sort of full thoughts on them once I finish this episode. Now I want to clarify that the speeder bike that Luke stole, they're also named jump speeders. That's just the name of speeder bikes in Star Wars. Jump speeders are seemingly, I don't know, I was going to say a nickname for them, but speeder bike and jump speeder, they aren't any shorter or longer than each other, so why anyone would call it that, I don't know. But for clarity, on Endor, so in Return of the Jedi, the speeders that we see used are the 74Zs, and they're the main Imperial and the main Republic speeders. They're also in games, they're in the Mandalorian and stuff, but that's the model, 74-Z speeder bike. So then, let's move on to issue number 74. Orba saves Luke's life by running over a lot of the Imperials that were pursuing him. She says it was only for the money, and he says that he knew he sensed more in her. And he also comments that his friend talks like that, but he always comes through. And obviously he's speaking about Han, and then the next panel is Han talking. It shows that Han, I keep swapping between Han and Han, I keep catching myself doing it. I'm not going to edit the whole episode and make sure I do it right because it would take me forever. I'm sorry guys, sometimes I say Han, sometimes I say Han. Forgive me please. So anyway, Han, along with Dar, Champion and Leia, head to the Star Destroyer. Han questions it because he's thinking, how on earth are we going to destroy a Star Destroyer with this little shuttle? And then Leia says that, if we don't go ahead with this, then Dar's people will suffer. So Han then calls 3PO and Chewie, saying he's got an idea, and it turns out that Luke is also on the call at the same time, so it's a nice little three-way phone call. While Luke's on the call, he's being chased by Imperials on these mounted lizard creature things that don't show up anywhere else in canon or Legends, and it shows that basically all three of the groups are in dire straits. They're in bad situations and trying to work out how to get out of them. So what Han says to do is to put them on a clear channel, and so 3PO is like, but the Imperials will be able to intercept it, and he's like, yep, I know, that's fine. Let's do it. And so he sends basically a fake transmission. He says, there's a problem with our mission. Can we come back to base, please? And then 3PO responds with, yes, of course. You can come to our base on K43 and come back there. And 3PO says, yes, of course, you can come to our base at K43. Come back and we'll sort you out. The Imperial officer on board the Star Destroyer obviously hears about this transmission that the Imperials intercepted, and then he decides that he doesn't want to tell Admiral Ozzel, as in essence he wants the glory. So the Star Destroyer aims to go and follow Han's ship and goes to K43. Meanwhile, Luke and Warber manage to lose the Imperials that were following them and shooting at them on the backs of these lizard things, and they manage to get back to the rebels that are on the base of Sergia. Luke introduces the rebels to Warber, and then she warns him and says, well, you're not going back to help your friends, are you? Like, Darth Vader's there, he'll kill you. And Luke says, I know, but I have to help my friends, and thank you for your help so far. And Warber says that she didn't really help him with anything, she barely knows anything about the Force, she just overheard some stuff from the Guardians of the Whills. Luke says that he still learned from her and appreciated what she did, and then he gets into his X-Wing and leaves. For clarity, R2-D2 is in his X-Wing. Meanwhile, 3PO is on K43 and he is panicking because of half of the explosive devices now are set to go off. He speaks to the Rock people about his panics, and they say that they can stop the bombs because they can generate electricity. So he allows them to do that, and it creates this big pulse. And before they do this, they do say to 3PO, look, it may turn you off, it'll turn off basically everything electrical, and 3PO says that's fine. So the pulse goes off, it turns off 3PO, it wounds Vader because it means that all of his cybernetics don't work by themselves, so I think he has to use the Force to kind of help them move. The bombs all turn off, but then Luke's X-Wing is quite nearby and it crash lands. Vader then slowly emerges, and before he can do anything, Chewie attacks him and smashes him with a rock. They grab each other's arms, they tussle and things, and then Vader starts to Force choke Chewie, and that is where comic number 74 ends. So we move on to the final issue of the 2015 Star Wars run, issue number 75. So kicking it all off, Han, Dar and Leia's ship appears at K43, shortly followed by a Star Destroyer. While this is happening, Vader and Chewie are still fighting, and Chewie pushes Vader off the edge of like a cliffside. He falls into lava, uses the Force to push the lava out the way, and then hits the ground. He stands up, uses the Force, and then tries to push all the lava at Chewie. Chewie manages to just about avoid it, and as he does, he's sort of on his hands and knees with his fur singed a little bit. Luke approaches. He goes nearby, picks up a rock, chants to himself, "I am one with the Force and the Force with me," throws the rock down to try and cause an avalanche to crush Vader, and instead he slips and falls down the avalanche that he has caused. Vader then starts to use Force Choke on Luke, but then Chewie appears, grabs Luke, and basically runs away. And then some stormtroopers up on the cliffside that they came from start to shoot them, and Chewie becomes pinned down. Han, Leia and Dar's ship then lands nearby. It's quite a hard landing, and it causes all the stormtroopers to kind of freak out and either get crushed by the vehicle or to run away. They manage to park the ship right near where Chewie and Luke are laying, and then they turn to see Darth Vader in the distance. They all start firing blasters at Darth Vader, and although he is hurt due to his armor and having a fight with a Wookiee and whatnot, he puts his hand out and manages to block some of the energy bolts and things, but he doesn't manage to block all of them and does take a couple of hits because he doesn't have his lightsaber. Vader then force pushes all of them, they fall to the floor. He goes down to one knee, and then some stormtroopers then come and help pick him up. He then stumbles back to the shuttle with the stormtroopers, and then he chokes the officer on board, and then uses the Force and something else, assumedly, to create an electrical pulse. He then chokes the Imperial officer on board, grabs a bunch of wires, and then somehow creates some sort of electrical pulse. I would assume maybe from his armor or with the Force or something, but he creates an electrical pulse that then turns all the electronics back on. So his armor turns on, 3PO turns on, and a lot of the things that got deactivated by the initial pulse have now been reactivated. 3PO is then talking to the rock people still, and they're calling him sort of friend and brother and whatnot, and thanking him for everything. And a really, really big one, I'm talking like maybe 100 foot tall, picks up the Millennium Falcon, walks it towards Han and the group, and then puts the Falcon down near them. 3PO then realises that the detonators would then be reactivated again, and they've probably got about 3 minutes before they detonate. The rock people say that they'll be fine, and that they're not quite as weak as people made out of flesh. And so Leia and Dar go onto the shuttle they came in, Luke heads for his X-Wing while Vader pursues him, and Han heads towards the Millennium Falcon. As Luke heads for his X-Wing, Vader is pursuing him, and then there's lots of rumbling and things, and then the rocks start to shake, and everything starts to kind of move. R2-D2 manages to lift the X-Wing up, obviously flying it and whatnot, and Luke manages to grab onto it, and then it zooms out and shows that the reason the whole planet was rumbling is because the planet seems to be an encasing of some sort of a giant rock person, as in, imagine the size of a planet, and then it kind of cracking open almost like an egg, and then a person made out of rocks standing out from it, because that's what this comic is, and it's quite bizarre. It shows the Millennium Falcon, the shuttle that Dar and Leia were on, and Luke's X-Wing all managed to get off the planet before this giant rock person crawled out of it. And then it shows that Boss Carpo appears in his ship. Boss Carpo's ship is the one that Han was held on in issue 73, that I tackled a little bit earlier. Before the ship can really do much, the big rock person hits the Star Destroyer into Boss Carpo's ship, which obviously causes a lot of damage. While this happens, an Imperial shuttle goes and collects Vader from the rubble of this planet, and he manages to get back to the Dreadnought, which is his Super Star Destroyer, which has got Admiral Ozzel on there. It shows Ozzel asks if Vader is on board, his subordinate confirms that it is, and then they say to jump to lightspeed. Luke's X-Wing is now floating nearby, seemingly may have got damaged by either the planet half exploding or all the explosions from the Star Destroyer and other things. I want to clarify, there was the Star Destroyer that followed them to the planet that had the Imperial officer that Boss Carpo wanted killed, and then there's the Super Star Destroyer, which is the Dreadnought, which is Vader's Star Destroyer, which doesn't get destroyed until Return of the Jedi when it crashes into the Death Star 2. Just to clarify, because it gets a little bit confusing explaining in audio format. But in essence, you've got Luke's X-Wing is kind of flying there. It seems to not really be working very well. And then he kind of notices Vader. Vader then reaches out with the Force and is about to do something. And then, obviously, the Star Destroyer that he's on jumps to lightspeed. Luke is then sort of stuck floating around in his X-Wing. And then the rebels from Sergia, along with Warber, show up and save Luke. They manage to put like a tow cable onto the X-Wing and take him back to the rest of the fleet. It shows that 3PO is still with the rock people. It's confirmed that the giant one that broke out of the planet was their grandmother, And the reason they weren't worried about the detonators or anything was because they thought they would survive and this grandmother thing would come out. But they didn't want to say it beforehand because they wanted to make sure that 3PO's friends would be safe. And then once they were off the planet and stuff, then she could awake. 3PO thanks them, and then Chewie in a spacesuit manages to come out and grab 3PO and then take him back. They're both quite happy with each other and call each other friends. And then it shows that the rebellion managed to get to Hoth. Everyone seems to be quite happy that the whole fleet is at Hoth and they seem to be able to make their new base and whatnot. And then the final panels show that as long as you have hope and as long as you have friends, that can be enough. And it shows the absolute last panel is just Darth Vader standing on a Star Destroyer completely by himself. And that is where issue number 75 ends. Now, I did like the story. I liked the art. I just thought this was, to put it bluntly, a fairly weak ending. I mean, it's one of those things, and when I was collecting these issues in the first instance, I don't think I actually got this far. I think after the Ashes of Jeddah arc, I kind of switched off a bit. This was back before I had the podcast, when I was just collecting for fun and whatnot. And yeah, this isn't a bad issue necessarily. It's just the problem is when you have a group of characters, obviously Chewie, 3PO, R2-D2, Luke, Han and Leia, and the Millennium Falcon, all doing stuff for 75 comics in the span of 3 years. Really, there's only so much you can do because none of them can die, and none of them can get really badly wounded, like substantially, except maybe right at the start, because you know that they're all relatively fine when Empire Strikes Back starts. So the problem is having a 75-issue run of 6 characters who are in the realm of these comics are mortal, because it has to be canon to the films. It just means that some of the storylines can be a little bit weak. And with this one, it doesn't really feel like a really big ending. It doesn't feel like the ending of a big 75-issue run. It just kind of feels like the end of almost a mini-series, compared to like the end of Dr. Aphra, the end of Darth Vader, the end of a lot of the other comics as well, have quite a big full-stop ending. And this feels like a car that just sort of ran out of gas or ran out of fuel and then just kind of slowly came to a halt. And then that's kind of it, rather than it being this, amazing cross over the finish line, do a cool, like, handbrake turn and stop and air horns go off. It was just like, oh, we just kind of stopped here. Once again, nothing against Greg Pak, because he's an excellent writer. He's done some really cool other Star Wars stories in amidst this one, but also obviously he's doing the current 3rd run of Darth Vader comics, 2020 run, and he did quite a few of the Age of stories as well. So nothing against the creators of this. I think it's still a fun thing to read, but when you guys read this, I would argue this is actually one of the most lackluster arcs, as in the whole Rogues and Rebels, or Rebels and Rogues arc. I think it's probably one of the weakest arcs of the whole main run of Star Wars, which is quite sad, considering, one would hope it would be one of the best. But, oh well, that's not the end of the world, and we're done with it now, it seems. So we're on to the final story in this little batch, and the story is called An Echo of Victory. It is in Empire Ascendant number 1, and to remind everyone, it's written by Charles Soule, the artist is Luke Ross, and the colour artist is Guru EFX. Now, Empire Ascendant 1, it has 4 short-ish stories in there. It's quite a chunky comic, so it's not like a proper short story, but the stories aren't like really, really long. And so there are 4 in there, and most of them serve as sort of epilogues or prologues. So this one is an epilogue to obviously the main run of Star Wars, and it kind of connects with Empire Strikes Back a bit. There's another one which I tackled when I finished the Dr. Aphra 2016 run, and that was in this comic as well. Then there's another one which is the end to the Darth Vader comics. Now, I didn't read that when I did the ending of the 2015 Darth Vader run by Kieran Gillen. I didn't read that out specifically. So what I'll probably do is I'll probably read that before delving into Greg Pak's 2020 Darth Vader run, once I finish with the 2017 Darth Vader run by Charles Soule, which I think there's like 2 more volumes of. So I will be tackling that, and the other one is to do with bounty hunters. So there was the Target Vader miniseries, which I tackled a little while ago. I think it's episode like 49 or something like that. So yeah, episode 49, I tackled Target Vader, which is about, Valance. And then there's this prologue, epilogue thing for bounty hunters to kind of start off. And then there's the main run of Bounty Hunters comics, which obviously, if any of you have been listening to all of the episodes of Star Wars Comics in Canon, I've been doing the War of the Bounty Hunters, and the War of the Bounty Hunters big crossover event includes the running series bounty hunters. But I haven't got onto the bounty hunters series yet. I've read them obviously, but I haven't tackled them on this show as of yet. But when I do tackle them on this show, I will make a mental note to do the Empire Ascendant prologue/epilogue, depending how you look at it, for the Bounty Hunters arc, and then you guys will have heard of all of the Empire Ascendant comics. If you can't wait that long, just check it out. I think it's on Marvel Unlimited. As I said, it's just called Empire Ascendant. It's not bad, but when you read the comic, if you're not reading it when you've just finished Star Wars, Dr. Aphra, and the Darth Vader 2015 run, the stories just seem a little bit disjointed because obviously they're just like a short story interlude thing. But anyway, with that all in mind, let's get on to Empire Ascendant number 1. And weirdly enough, this little story has more connections than the last 3 issues of the main run of Star Wars. Obviously, that's part because the Star Wars issues were trying to finish a story, whereas the Empire Ascendant is kind of linking this run and then the next run that's going to be by Charles Soule. So I want to flush that out, and so let's get on to Empire Ascendant 1, An Echo of Victory. So the story starts on Hoth, when the rebels are sorting out their base, which is called Echo Base. Now, a few little facts about Hoth. So it's in the Outer Rim, and it's in the Anoat sector, along with Bespin and Burnin Kon. Burnin Kon, I think, was mentioned in the Mandalorian episode, the second one with Migs Mayfield. And looking online, it seems that Hoth is mentioned in loads and loads of stories, but it's not really shown anywhere else in the canon. It's mentioned in the Lost Stars book. It's mentioned in almost all content that is set after Empire Strikes Back, because obviously the Battle of Hoth is a major, major thing for the Rebellion, the Empire, and all of us watching, because it's a really, really cool, scene or set piece or whatever you want to call it. So I just thought I'd give you that little bit of information about Hoth. And in addition to that, a little bit of trivia. It was actually filmed in Finse in Norway, and then also the Wampas, which obviously at the start of the film you see the Wampa attack Luke, which is the big Yeti abominable snowman, whatever you want to call it, the big white thing that looks a little bit like a Wookiee but probably a bit scarier. That is called a Wampa. Now, Wampas are native to Hoth, and they're actually more prominent than it seems, because obviously in the film you only see one of them, but there's actually lots of them over Hoth. And in fact, in the canon, it's confirmed that there are Wampas, or groups of them, that would either try and attack Echo Base in night, or would maybe pick off Tauntauns if they were left outside, those sort of things. And there's a few deleted scenes which are kind of canon adjacent in a sense, where, deleted scenes in the original trilogy and the prequels, it's kind of hazy as to which ones are canon and which ones aren't, because they're not all canon, but some are considered canon. Like, I think where in Return of the Jedi, there's a deleted scene that I only watched for the first time, a few months ago, which is when Luke is in the cave before going to Jabba's palace fixing or making his new lightsaber. Now, that is considered to be canon and what he did, but the deleted scene isn't in the film, whereas in the prequels, there's a couple of scenes that are canon, but there's other ones that aren't, like Shark T gets killed by Grievous in one of the scenes, but then that's not how she dies. It's really weird deleted scenes. I've not actually seen all the deleted scenes in Star Wars because it just seems to muddy the waters a lot. I believe that the deleted scenes in the sequels, I think they are considered canon though. So deleted scenes are just a mess to get into. But rambling aside, there are scenes that are either cut from the script or deleted, which the Wampas were meant to be a lot more prominent in there. And there's actually a scene that is referenced, which is Leia and Han end up locking a Wampa in this room. Then they put a sticker on it saying, warning, don't go in here. And then C-3PO seemingly takes part of the sticker off the wall by accident, or off the door by accident. And then some Imperials, when they attack the base, some stormtroopers open a door and they get snatched by a Wampa. And that's the Wampa they're speaking about. And that is apparently canon, and it gets referenced elsewhere as well. It's a bit confusing and it's a bit complicated, but I just thought I'd add that in there just because I can't really talk about Hoth without the Wampa, because obviously it's a really cool thing. So, all that weirdness aside, let's move on to the next bits. So, on Hoth, you've got Shara Bey and Kes Dameron. They're talking about using an A-wing cannon to carve out the ice tunnels. Kes has been helping design the base. They then fire the cannon, rocks fall, crush the cannon, and one falls on Kes's leg. Now, you guys may remember the names. Obviously, Dameron is a surname that you should remember. Shara Bey and Kes Dameron are Poe Dameron's parents. They do send a message to Poe in a little bit when he's 2 years old. but they were actually first shown in the Shattered Empire miniseries, which is part of the Journey to the Force Awakens line. Now, I actually tackled that on episode 4 of Star Wars Comics in Canon, so go back and check that out. And it was set just after Return of the Jedi. It's basically what people did after the sort of happy party you see at the end of Return of the Jedi, what they kind of did after that a little bit. Now, the Aftermath trilogy of books by Chuck Wendig go into a lot more detail of what happened the following year and a half after the Battle of Endor, but Shattered Empire is much more local. It's like the next couple of weeks, I believe it is, but that introduces Shara Bey and Kes Dameron as Poe Dameron's parents, obviously because Poe Dameron's quite prominent in the sequel trilogy. Now, there is a Poe Dameron series, which was written by Charles Soule. I think it's 30 or 40 issues long, if what I remember, and I haven't actually read any of it, ashamedly. It's the only Star Wars canon comics that are made by Marvel that I haven't actually read, aside from brand new ones that as of recording right now I haven't had a chance to read yet. So I'm quite excited to get into those, and I will be tackling them once I've kind of caught up with a lot of these other series and things, but they are more prominent in that, and it goes into sort of Poe's backstory and whatnot, and there's a few little retconny bits that Rise of Skywalker have had to kind of adjust slightly, which is why the book Poe Dameron Freefall is out, because I had to kind of explain how Poe went from his parents to the Republic Navy, and then to the Spice Runners of Kijimi, and then to the Resistance. It's all a whole thing, but I'll get into that when I tackle the Poe Dameron comics, no doubt. But for clarity, Shara Bey actually dies 10 years after the Battle of Yavin. So where you see her now, that is based basically the start of Empire Strikes Back. That's 3 years after the Battle of Yavin. So at this point, Poe is actually about 3 years old. So she dies in 10 years after the Battle of Yavin, which is when Poe is approximately 8 years old, thereabouts. Kes Dameron does not die, to our knowledge, and he actually survives for quite a long time, and I'll get into all those sort of bits and pieces when I do tackle the Poe Dameron comics, but they actually retconned Kes back into Return of the Jedi. So there's a lot of people squabbling online about if Nick Santos, I think his name is, which is the really bearded guy in the Battle of Endor, if that is actually Rex, because in Legends it was Nick Santos or Nick Sant, I think it might have been actually, but they just gave him that joke name because he had a beard like Santa. And then what they've done in recent stuff is say that Rex was the Battle of Endor, and that guy with the beard was actually Rex. Now, they've done another bit of retconning, which is there's a character, a rebel, who throws a charge to Han Solo when they're in the bunker, when they're about to blow it all up and things. The person who threw the charge, I don't know what his name was beforehand, but in the new canon, that is actually Poe Dameron's dad, Kes. So Kes was a part of the group that Han Solo took down to Endor and helped him blow up the thing, which basically won them not only the war, not only the battle rather, but the entire war. So Kes is really, really important to the rebellion, and Shara Bey is a really, really talented pilot as well. So that's me just spewing information at you guys about Poe Dameron and that sort of tomfoolery. So yeah, back to the main story. So these rocks have fallen, they've crushed the cannon for the A-Wing, and Kes can't move because he's worried that the rock could be weight-bearing and then it could close off loads of other tunnels and things. So Kes basically prepares to bleed out or freeze to death. Shara Bey is trying to be a bit more optimistic, and they decide to record a message for Poe. They mention hope and love and that sort of thing. If you want to read the message, pick up the comic. But towards the end of the recording, Kes is a little bit pessimistic on the rebellion's chances. He's worried that the Empire will win. He's kind of confused. He's like, the Death Star was so long ago, which at this point was 3 years prior, and they just seem like they've been losing every battle with the Empire since then. Obviously, the Battle of Hoth, the rebels escaped, but that wasn't a battle they won. They lost that battle. Their base got destroyed and found. The shield generator got destroyed. They lost a lot of men and ships and etc. So, obviously that hasn't happened as of yet, but it's about to happen. So it's like the rebellion were in quite dire straits for most of the war. They were not, even though the films make it seem like the rebellion are winning all the time, they're really not. It's just destroying the Death Star and the Death Star 2 were really the only massive blows to the Empire outside of the show Star Wars Rebels that I know of. Anyway, Kes is pessimistic on the rebellion's chances. Then, when it seems like all hope is sort of lost, Luke appears with his lightsaber. The lightsaber cuts through a nearby wall, and Luke appears with Chewbacca, and they save them. It turns out that they cut through the command center to get to where Kes and Shara were, and then they're going to have to relocate the command center to a different place because it's now compromised due to the big hole in the side. And Kes is incredibly thankful. He's like, well, you guys did this for us. You're like, you're going to relocate your entire command center just because I got stuck under a rock. And then Leia's like, well, you are rebels. You are us. Moving the command center is not anything of value compared to your life. We care about you. We're a family. We need to get through this and beat the Empire, and through that we need to do it all together. And then the final panels of this shows that Kes is kind of being looked at by a medical droid and things, and Shara Bey is next to him, and he says that he thinks the rebels will win the war. And that's where the story ends. So it's a nice little story just about hope, really. It gives a little bit more details to Kes and to Shara Bey. And the other little bit of additional connection I wanted to give to you was about A-Wings. So obviously I mentioned that the cannon for the A-Wing was used to carve out the ice tunnels. Now, the A-Wing starfighter is called the R-7-1 A-Wing Interceptor. Now, the R-7-2 A-Wing Interceptor was used in the sequel trilogy, but the RZ-1 A-Wing Interceptor was used in the original trilogy. They're the ones that you guys saw. Now, what's quite interesting is I didn't find this out until I did some research today, and it's an A-Wing is actually the successor to the Jedi starfighter, the Delta-7 Aether Sprite class light interceptor. So in Attack of the Clones, when Obi-Wan flies his ship, and it's also, I think, on the cover of Jedi Starfighter, the game, which is Legends game, basically the triangular ship, which is generally white and reddish, the one that Obi-Wan flies when he tracks down, Jango Fett on Geonosis, that sort of thing, that ship is the Delta-7 Aether Sprite. So Kuwait Systems, who made the Delta-7 Aether Sprite, they then make the A-Wing as a successor to that. So it's quite interesting that the Rebellion uses a ship which was a successor ship to what the Empire were using. And once again, the A-Wings, just like lots of other ships that got made, such as the X-Wing as well, is, from what I can gather, for the majority of the corporations that make the ships, they basically made a batch of ships for the Empire. The Empire looked at them, said, these are far too expensive, we don't want them, we're not going to pay for them, and then they were just abandoned or left or whatever, and then the Rebellion either buys them off these corporations, or they steal them, or they just get them from like a scrapyard, whatever. That's how a lot of the ships that the Rebellion get is basically rejects from the Empire, because obviously when they made the TIE Fighter, they wanted to be as cheap and efficient as possible, which is why standard TIE Fighters don't have hyperdrives, why standard ones don't have deflector shields, why like one hit can take them down, whereas generally X-Wings are a little bit more resilient, because X-Wings are generally better built, and they have deflector shields and etc. But yeah, that's a little readout of the A-Wing. I just thought it was really cool to know that the A-Wing was a successor to the Delta-7 Aether Sprite Jedi Starfighter. I just thought that was quite a cool little thing that I didn't know about. But yeah, that is basically it for this episode, guys. That is the bulk of it. Now I'm going to waffle on about what you can expect coming up from Star Wars Comics and Canon and all the other stuff I'm involved with. So I hope you guys enjoyed the episode. I know obviously a lot of you guys listen to these episodes and I appreciate it. Please just let me know, have any of you guys, did you read the main run of Star Wars comics? Did you finish the main run of Star Wars comics? What have you kind of thought about them? Because I would be interested to hear if anyone's got some sort of thoughts on whether or not you think it was a bit of an anticlimactic ending like I kind of did, or if you do think that it was really amazing and you absolutely loved it. I'd be interested to hear you guys' opinion. There's no right or wrong answer. Everyone enjoys Star Wars in different ways and for different reasons, so please let me know about that. So then what have we got coming up? So obviously this is episode 69, the funny number. Next week is episode 70, quite a more serious number, and it is going to be tackling the next batch of Darth Vader comics. So it's going to be volume 3 of the Darth Vader run by Charles Soule, Darth Vader, Dark Lord of the Sith. They were from 2017, and we're going to be tackling issues 13 to 18, so that's 6 issues, plus we're going to be doing the Darth Vader Annual number 2, because in the trade paperback collection of Darth Vader volume 3, The Burning Seas, which is what it's called, within that trade paperback collection, you've got those 6 standard issues as well as the annual. So what other place to do the annual other than that episode? So that's going to be next week. So, make sure you guys get some reading in, or, don't and listen to my episode anyway. I enjoy it either way. The week after that is going to be, I think, the next Dr. Aphra comic. Let me check my notes. Yep, that'll be the last volume of the 2020 Dr. Aphra run before it bleeds into the War of the Bounty Hunters stuff. So that'll be Dr. Aphra all caught up. Then the week after that, I believe, is going to be the next batch of War of the Bounty Hunters, which will be War of the Bounty Hunters Chapter 3. And then we'll kind of go from there, really, because after that point, I'll need to do 2 or potentially 3 batches of Star Wars comics from the 2020 run by Charles Soule, which will then bleed into War of the Bounty Hunters. I'll have 1 more Darth Vader volume to do of the 2017 Darth Vader run, I hope. Fortress Vader is a very hefty volume, which is the last volume of those Vader comics, but I'll see if I need to split them or not. So that'll be Darth Vader caught up with and done. So that will mean that Aphra's done, soon to be Vader is done. In amidst one of those two, I will then start tackling the Poe Dameron comics, and then in amidst the other one, I will likely start tackling the High Republic comics, which is something I've been looking forward to doing for a while, but I think as of recording this, they're only on like number 8 or something. So in about a month or two's time, the High Republic will be on, number 10 or so. So I mean, there should be 2 full big arcs that are done there. And then I'll, at some point I'll tackle the High Republic Adventures comics as well, which are really, really cool. They're by Daniel Jose Older, whereas the main run of the High Republic comics are written by Kevin Scott. And then after that, the world's my oyster. There's quite a few IDW comics I need to do. Obviously, High Republic Adventures is one of them. There's the Tales from Vader's Castle. There are 3 anthology collections for the Vader's Castle one. They're basically like anthology horror comics written by Kevin Scott. The 3rd batch of them, which is Ghosts from Vader's Castle, is coming out in October. So at some point, maybe for like a Halloween special or something, I'll tackle a batch of the Vader's comic ones. We'll see about that, see how we feel at the time. And then I should be relatively up to date with most things. I need to actually thinking about it. I need to do the Bounty Hunters comics as well. So potentially when I finish the Dr. Aphra comics, I might then embark on the Bounty Hunters comics, because then it will mean that every series will have finished by the time I do War of the Bounty Hunters, which will mean that all of the ongoing series of Star Wars that are at the moment, they'll all be caught up. So that's kind of where I'm looking at now. So get all the ongoing series kind of up to War of the Bounty Hunters there and finished, and then I will embark on all the other sort of wonderful things. So that's generally it from me on that regard. The only other things to waffle on about is stuff I've been doing, guest spots and whatnot. I haven't been doing any guest spots in the last few weeks because obviously I've been on holiday and whatnot. I'm going to start doing a few more. And as of recording this right now, there's actually, I don't know when it's going to be out. It might already be out by the time this episode comes out. Who knows? But the 2nd book club for the Comics in Motion gang. So obviously the first Comics in Motion book club was myself, Matthew B. Lloyd, and Dave Horrocks. And we did the Darth Vader Volume 1 of the 2017 Charles Soule run, which is really good. And this time it's Mouse, which is a vastly different book by Art Spiegelman. And that is about the Holocaust, which is a nice cheery subject. So if you've read that, check out the book club, which will be out shortly, and I'll include a link to that in the description if it is out at the point of this episode being released. And then, there's going to be more book clubs to come over the coming months and that sort of thing, and I'm sure I'm going to be popping up on other people's shows doing other stuff. I have already got a few things planned here and there. But other than that, check out my, other show, Genuine Chit-Chat, where I have honest conversations with interesting people. I have a different guest on each episode. And if you keep your eye out, Jack from I Am Jack's Musings, he's on Season's Greetings with Tony Farina. He also does the Pop Gorillas. He's been involved in lots of other things, and he's going to be making a special appearance on the book club as well. And I think he's going to be hosting the 3rd book club as well, but I won't spoil what that's going to be about yet, just in case. But that's going to be mentioned at the end of the 2nd book club, so make sure you look out for that. But yeah, I'm having Jack on my podcast, or I've already had him on the podcast. It was a great chat. It was like 2 hours long, and I'm going to be releasing part 1 on Sunday. So as recording this is the 2nd of September. So tomorrow's the 3rd. This will be out on the 4th of September. So on the 5th of September, head over to just Genuine Chit-Chat. It's on its own feed and everything. Anywhere you're listening to Comics in Motion, you'll be able to find Genuine Chit-Chat. And you can listen to me and Jack talk about him podcasting, and mainly films, really. We talk about films for like 2 hours. So if you enjoy films, then make sure you check that out as well when that comes out. And then also check out my Patreon, patreon.com/genuinechitchat. All patrons get access to an audio feed where you get an episode of Afterthoughts at least once a week. There's road trips that me and Megan go on that we record exclusively for Patreon on there. While I was off a week or 2 ago, there was the episodes where me and Megan were talking about the prequels, and that was a fun little thing we did on Patreon. We've also done the original trilogy. We've done The Force Awakens, I think, as well. We've got that recorded. And then we're also going to be doing The Last Jedi and also The Rise of Skywalker. Plus we do loads of other things as well. There's new films that come out that we've been watching and putting on there. There's TV series, all kinds of stuff. But you can donate as little as £1 a month and you get access to the RSS feed, which you can put on the podcast app of your choice, and then you just get hours of additional content. You also get Genuine Chit-Chat stuff early, so if you're really clamoring for that full conversation with Jack and you can't wait for part 2, if you become a Patreon supporter, you get access to part 1 and part 2 in one nice little episode. Nice large episode, I should say, and you get to support the show as well. If you support the show for more, like £2 a month and things like that, you get access to additional stuff. But yeah, I just thought I'd plug that as well. But links to everything I talk about are in the description, as always, and I've been rambling on at this end bit for far too long for an episode that was meant to be slightly shorter. Anyway, guys, thank you as always for listening. Make sure you check out all the amazing shows on the feed of Comics in Motion. Make sure you check out my other show, Genuine Chit-Chat. Check out my Patreon, and, just keep being awesome, because I love all of you for listening to the show. I love you listening all the way to the end, especially my rambly nonsense, and I look forward to talking to you guys next week with Volume 3 of the 2017 Darth Vader run. So, my friends, as always, talk to you next week, and may the Force be with you. The intro for Star Wars Comics in Canon is arranged by myself, Mike Burton, and the backing music was made by Eric Matias of soundimage.org.
You have just experienced host, creator, everything elser of Genuine Chit-Chat, and also the host and creator of Star Wars Comics in Canon, found on the Comics in Motion podcast, Mike Burton.